I really didn't feel like making this video, but hey, we've got to. News is news, and we need to talk about the popular topics. The Ballon d'Or every single year just feels like a balloon that keeps inflating and inflating until it finally bursts. Sometimes it pops nicely and everyone applauds. Other time it bursts like a nasty pimple and all that comes out is a pure mess. Alright, before we dive straight into the final rankings, I want to repeat what I've said before about the Ballon d'Or. I hate, like really hate, the expressions stolen Ballon d'Or, robbed Ballon d'Or, rigged Ballon d'Or. You can't steal something that's decided by votes, by personal opinions. You can compare your own opinion with the one that came out on top in those votes. That's a whole different thing. That's what I do sometimes, and yeah, I'll probably do that again in this video. Yeah, you can say the voters were wrong. That's fine. But saying it was robbed just shows you don't get the basic idea of how voting works. Like it or not, this is how the Ballon d'Or works. So, did Dembélé deserve this Ballon d'Or? As long as the voters said so, yes. I don't think there's ever been a completely undeserved Ballon d'Or. Every year, the top 5, sometimes even the top 10, are basically the best players around. And usually, with rare exceptions, the top 3 are guys who really had seasons worthy of the trophy. Which one of them wins, it's not up to us anymore. Dembélé won it this time, congrats to him, and we move on to the next. If we're talking fairness, then yeah, people point out things, and maybe they are right. I've got some too. First of all, in my opinion, the Ballon d'Or should always be an individual award. It should reward the best footballer at the end of the season. And that's where it fails. Yeah, the voters get a guide, but that guide is super vague. You don't really know if individual performances are supposed to be the top priority, or just one of the boxes to check. Logically, it should be the main thing. It's an individual award, but in reality, a lot of seasons it goes to the main guy from the Champions League winning team. And for me, that's nonsense. This way, you're not rewarding the best individual season. You're rewarding a good season from a guy already surrounded by a great squad. And yeah, sometimes that means players at other clubs who worked harder than everyone get overlooked. And we can't do much about it. The truth is, that guide for voters is basically just for show. Nobody actually sticks to it. There's no strict voting system, it's all down to vibes at the end of the season. That's how we end up with some ridiculous results. Let's start there. If we take the guide seriously and say individual performances matter most, then the guy who should have gone home with the Ballon d'Or was Raphinha. Nobody had a better season. One capped off with incredible numbers in the Champions League, I presume the toughest competition. Sure, other players had strong stats. Gyökeres is a good example. But no one matched Raphinha's season in a top league, an elite UCL campaign. If it were statistical, if it were honest, Raphinha would have won. Funny enough, he finished 5th. That's how you see the double standards. Dembélé is at the top, not because he had the best individual season, but because he also won the Champions League. That pushed him over the line. So UCL does matter, right? Well, apparently not when it comes to Raphinha. For those who forgot, most goals in the competition, most assists, most chances created, best ratings, the first guy to match Cristiano Ronaldo's peak UCL season, all Raphinha. And he didn't just stat pad in the group stage. He was decisive in every knockout round up to the semi-final. So explain this. Why is Raphinha below Salah, a guy with 3 UCL goals who went out in the quarters? Nothing against Salah, I really like him as a player, but come on. Liverpool faced Milan, Real Madrid and PSG, and Salah had 0 goals, 0 assists against any of them. So when it comes to Dembélé, UCL is the key argument to put him ahead of Raphinha. But with Salah, suddenly it doesn't matter anymore, and he's still above Raphinha. Yeah, results like this are absurd. That's why some people say the award had lost credibility. Of course, most of those people usually only say it when their favorite player doesn't win. But still, having Raphinha 5th after his season is a joke. I'm not going to go too deep into the direct Dembélé-Raphinha comparison. I've already made a video on this on my Romanian channel. In that one, I broke it all down with stats. In the UCL, Raphinha absolutely dominates, leading in almost every relevant category. Dembélé only edges him in 2 of them, and even then by the tiniest margins. I even made a radar chart comparison so you could see it visually why it's ridiculous to claim Dembélé had the better Champions League season. I even added the defensive stats because people always hype up Dembele's pressing work. But the truth, he never outran Raphinha, not once. I also did a full season comparison, not just UCL, and again Raphinha is miles ahead. Dembele only looks slightly better at dribbling, but otherwise he can't compare. Still, like I said, none of this actually matters, because the Ballon d'Or isn't decided on stats, it's all about vibes. And voters almost always pick based on the last 2 months of the season, not the entire campaign. People just tend to vote on the final stretch of the season and especially on trophies. So let's not waste time. Dembele didn't win because he had the better season than Raphinha. He won because his team had Hakimi, Nuno Mendes and Donnarumma in defense. That's where Barcelona fell short in the semis, and that's why Raphinha never got the chance to face PSG. Dembele won because PSG's backline was better, which again it's completely absurd for what's supposed to be an individual award. But since we're already on the team level point, let's go back to the voting guide. If we treat individual performances as the most important, we've already seen that the true winner should have been Raphinha. But if there's no ranking of importance and voters are supposed to weigh all 3 criteria equally, then there's 2 players who ticked all the boxes. And no, it wasn't Dembele, it wasn't Raphinha, it wasn't even Yamal. The 2 were Vitinha and Nuno Mendes. They didn't just play well, they had some of the best season worldwide for their positions. But unlike Dembele, they also won the Nations League. They basically won everything available except the Club World Cup. So if the criteria were truly respected, Dembele wouldn't have been the winner in any scenario. But like I told you, votes are fluid. They change from person to person, from opinion to opinion, from game to game. Now, me being a stats geek, I'll back this up. Strictly individual, the rightful winner was Raphinha. If it were all 3 criteria equally, then Vitinha or Nuno Mendes. And I've got no problem saying that because numbers don't lie. But instead we're stuck with this weird mix of performances, results and most importantly PR. Because of this, the final top 2 ended up being Dembele versus Yamal. Once again, if it were purely on stats, Yamal would have had a slight edge. I also made this comparison, it came out 6-5 for Yamal when you break it piece by piece. Dembele was ahead in goals, though a lot of them were in Ligue 1 against weaker teams, but let's not nitpick too much. On most other things, Yamal was better. Still, if you apply all the criteria, Dembele gets the nod because of the UCL. Between them, it's much closer than people think, and you can see it on the radar chart too. They split the comparison, it just depends on what you value more. And yes, Raphinha beats them both, but like I said, let's leave that aside. The bottom line, the Ballon d'Or has, especially in recent years, become heavily about PR, fame and online hype. Which I get, but maybe the voting process shouldn't rely solely on people, because then they're always open to attack. If we can draw Champions League fixtures with AI, surely it wouldn't be hard to design a rating system like SofaScore. Plug in the stats and trophies and the system tells you who deserve it the most. Not that hard, no more controversy. No one can argue with raw numbers. But maybe without controversy it wouldn't get as much attention. And maybe for France football that's exactly the point. Odd rankings get people talking. Because if Raphinha's 5th place is already absurd, the most senseless ranking of all has to be Pedri's. And here not even the internet is divided. Sure, you've got a few PSG ultras who can't step outside their bubble, and some hardcore Real Madrid fans who live only to hate Barcelona, but the overwhelming majority agree. Pedri was the most unfairly treated player this year. Maybe he doesn't get as much PR, maybe he's less visible because of the more defensive role Flick gave him, but after the kind of season he had, for Pedri not to even make the top 10, forget top 5, I'm just saying top 10, that's a disaster. It just proves that for a lot of voters, only goals or only the Champions League trophy matter. Outside the UCL final, apparently football doesn't exist for them the rest of the year. I already told you, by the 3 criteria rule, Vitinha would have been more deserving than Dembele. But if you go purely on individual level, and I did this comparison as well, Pedri crushes Vitinha. They play almost the same position, and the head-to-head came out something like 5-1 or 6-1 for Pedri. That means the guy who finished 11th was statistically way better than the guy who finished 3rd. That's a footballing anomaly. But again, what can we say? It's voting, it's opinions. Still, since that's the case, let's point out these two. If Vitinha is saved by his team trophies, UCL Nations League, there's still another midfielder ranked above Pedri, and that's Cole Palmer. Honestly, this is where it gets really hard to see any logic. Yes, Pedri is more of a pivot, Palmer more of a attacking mid, but they're both midfielders. And for anyone who actually watches football and sees more than the guy who scores is the guy who's good, there's no comparison. Competitions wise, Cole Palmer didn't even play UCL football. What's his big claim to a top 8 Ballon d'Or finish? Okay, they won the final against PSG. But again, that just proves my point. Voters only care about the last step. Doesn't matter if Pedri was consistently great all season. What matters is Palmer had one big game in July, and since it's fresh in people's minds, that's enough to push him way up in the ranking. That's pretty much the big picture of the discussion. And listen, I can't say I'm upset that Dembele won. It actually reinforces what I always told you. No two seasons are ever the same. It even proves what I used to say back when he was still at Barcelona. That on one of his good days, Dembele is the best in the world in his position. People laughed back then. But look, he's now on the same level as Zidane in at least one way. 6 Frenchmen have won the Ballon d'Or, Dembele is now one of them. And funny enough, he got it before Mbappe. Another topic people have been joking about for years. So, with all the good and the bad, Ousmane Dembele is the new Ballon d'Or winner, officially recognized as the best footballer on the planet for this past season. That's the story. We close the page, turn it over, and see what the next season brings. Actually, I'd love it if you guys dropped a comment below. Who do you think is going to win the next one? Let's check back here in a year and see how many of you called it right. And that's it. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, drop a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. It really helps the channel, especially now in the early days. Thanks a lot and see you in the next one.